Okay, so today we have Professor Svendsen with us, who will be talking on citizen sociolinguistics, affordances, and challenges. Bente Svendsen is Professor of Second Language Acquisition and Scandinavian Linguistics at the University of Oslo and Adjunct Professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. Svendsen initiated and co-developed the Center for Multilingualism in Society across a lifespan, a center of excellence funded by the Research Council of Norway. She has carried out research on multilingual socialization, competence, and use among children and adults, on linguistic practices and identity constructions among young people in multilingual urban settings, as well as media representations of minoritized language use and purported language users. Svendsen has comprehensive experience with public communication in a variety of channels, such as media participation in radio and TV programs, videos, podcasts, and in national, regional, and local newspapers and magazines. She was a project leader of a language exhibition, Oslo Says Language in the City. I've posted the link for you in the chat, so you can go directly to the YouTube link, and the language lounge at the Oslo City Museum. Thank you so much for being with us today, Professor Svendsen. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this generous introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here today, and good morning and good afternoon to some of us. It's a sunny day in Oslo, or in Black Forest, as Svart Skog, as Scott already pointed out. So before I start my talk, I would like to thank all of my collaborators. I'll just put the grid a bit down so that I can see my own slides. So, and without my dear collaborators, I could not have conducted this work at all. So I'm ever thankful, grateful for their work and enthusiasm. So thank you very much. So citizen sociolinguistics, what is that? Preliminary definition is perhaps like I put forward in an article in 2018, the involvement of citizens in doing sociolinguistic research. In that respect, involving them in doing citizen sociolinguistic research, citizen sociolinguistic is a form or a type of citizen science. And that brings us to the question, what is citizen science? In the literature, there are many definitions, but they all involve, as Kasparovsky, also from the University of Gothenburg, and his colleagues defines as the participation of non-professional contributors in the production of scientific knowledge. That is, of course, a very wide definition. The participation of non-professional contributors in the production of scientific knowledge. What does it actually mean? So they have put forward, Kasparovsky, a science philosopher, and his colleague has put forward a typology of citizen science approaches based on their work of mapping the field. There are no clear borders between these three different main types as they have made in as part of this typology, where the typology, the different types as such, are based on the level of citizen involvement, participation in the research process. So the first one, citizen science as a scientific method, that is definitely the most common, where the aim is to produce scientific output, and the main goal is to execute delimited research task. And so important point, it is when defined by the scientist. So that type, the most common, is where the scientists define what the citizens are going to explore and then invite the citizens to do that exploration. One example of that is, for instance, the Galaxy Zoo, which is a portal where volunteers contribute to classify different galaxies. It's a very nice web page. Have a look if you like. The second type is citizen science as public engagement, where the aim is to establish legitimacy for science and science policy in society by engaging public stakeholders in policy issues and to raise public awareness of specific phenomenon, but also of science. You might call it scientific literacy. And examples of those projects are typically outreach projects, for instance, pedagogical collaborations with schools, museums, and the like. And the third one is citizen science as civic mobilization. This type of project where the citizens' science is initiated by the citizens themselves, and where the aim is when they are aiming for legal or political influence in relation to specific issues. For instance, the Louisiana Bucket Brigades, they managed to put up air monitoring projects to monitor the pollution made by the local petrochemical industries. So citizen science is indeed gaining momentum, particularly the last decade, as I'll soon come back to, but citizen science has a long tradition. It dates back to perhaps as long as to Linné's biological classification system in the 18th century, but also English, the Oxford English dictionaries, for instance, where they relied on lay people's knowledge of different words, etc. We have the old Christmas bird count and Frederick Urquhart and his work on the monarch butterflies, and later on the Monarch Watch Initiative, still going on. And the main impact of citizen science is found primarily in studies of ecological changes in natural habitats. But what we see now, that over the last decade, citizen science is gaining more and more momentum across scientific disciplines, including the humanities and social sciences. Here you see a cumulative growth of the number of publications, citizen science publications across disciplines. And you see the analysis is made by Kasparovsky and Kallenberg, and where you see maybe not dramatical, but you see an increase from 2010 and onward, forward. Yeah. And the European Commission recognized citizen science as 1 out of 8 open science priorities in 2016. The United Nations highlights the importance of citizen science as a way to monitor and achieve the sustainable goals. So citizen science is important. They have just done that. And further, when you look at, if you go into the National Science Foundations, for instance, a web portal, or the European Commission web portal, and where you look for citizen science projects, you will see that the numbers of calls from national and international research funders lately have increased rapidly. A specialized journal, Citizen Science, was established in 2014. We have seen this establishment of citizen science associations in Europe, Australia, and the first one in the United States, Citizen Science Association, and in 2019, a citizen science lab at the University of Leiden in Holland, in Netherlands, was opened, and I was lucky to be there. And we see that there is an ongoing standardization of methods, development of toolkits, citizen science databases, and portals. I have mentioned some of them here for you. And an important portal is the EU Citizen Science Portal, where different nations European nations can upload their different citizen science projects. And just, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, the Swedish Medborgarforskning essay was uploaded. In Norway, we don't have a portal like that or a database like that. We are just about to establish a network from the Research Council of Norway's initiatives. And we just had our first meeting on Tuesday. So we're lagging behind, but we're coming, hopefully. Up until now, citizen science is largely US, Europe, Australia based. Sorry, I just have to have some water. But the 5th of November, just before Christmas, the first inaugural Citizen Science Africa meeting was held. In Asia, citizen science in Asia was established a couple of years ago, so something is happening, and that is good, because previously it has been, for instance, citizen science researchers or scientists in the United States doing citizen science studies in African context or in South American context. I've tried to find out whether there are some movement when it comes to South America and Latin America. I see that there is a call for a special issue and that kind of things, but I'm not sure. So if somebody had some knowledge about that, please inform us later in the discussion. So this recent development, or the citizen science turn, is so extensive that Kasparovsky and his colleagues argue that it resembles many of the aspects Kuhn associated with the development of normal science, or what we also know as a paradigm shift. And that is huge. So in other words, it is important to address and discuss the affordances and challenges of citizen science. And for us, it is important because we see the involvement of citizen science under the banner citizen sociolinguistics. In the literature, there are no clear-cut definition or no consensus on the definition of what citizen sociolinguistics is, or citizen sociolinguistic research. In 2018, I put forward this definition, that it requires the inclusion of non-professionals in doing sociolinguistic research, in collecting data, in registering them, analyzing and interpreting them, relative to the level of citizen involvement and collaboration, the research questions, and the design of the citizen science project. This definition is in line with the EXA's 10 principles for citizen science, and EXA is European Citizen Science Associations. So citizen, taking that angle as I did in my definition, then citizen sociolinguistic can range from crowdsourcing linguistic data through apps, for instance, the work in Manchester, Linkscape, LinguaSnap in Luxembourg, Linguistic Landscape on Linguistic Landscape, and the like. And crowdsourcing big data is emphasized as one of the main affordances of citizen science in general, and that is definitely the most frequent method or to collect big data. But it can also range to more qualitative ethnographic studies where you hand over parts of the research role to a citizen scientist. That has to a much lesser extent been conducted. The epistemological, well, touching into the epistemological rationale for citizen science is one, it's been argued that it is to reduce the observer's paradox, that you hand over to the citizen scientists, and so you are not the observer, but then again the citizen scientist is the observer. Anyhow, that is something to discuss whether that is the case or not, but that is put forward as an important argument for doing citizen science, to reduce the observer's paradox. But one thing for sure, when it comes to the epistemological rationale for citizen sociolinguistics, is that it is definitely more than just a method. It is based on an alteration of the relation between the researcher and the research, and thus the traditional way we conceive science and who has the authority to do it. So here, I will give you some examples of studies who explicitly uses the framework of citizen social linguistics. We have the work of Agostini and Strutretan on fat talk. Fat talk is like, oh, I'm so fat. Oh, no, you're not. Oh, yes, I hate my thighs. And on exploring multilingualism by Pruschke in Luxembourg, myself in Norway, and on children's narrative in England, and a lovely project on linguistic landscape, exploring where children and youth explored analog bulletin boards in Sweden. And of course, we have the views on exploring the views on language through social media as the work of Betsy Rimes at the University of Pennsylvania and her colleague Leonie. And they were the first one to introduce the term in 2014, where they calc their work and thoughts on citizen science in natural sciences, as I've outlined in the first part of my talk. So this is the outline of my talk. I have given you a preliminary definition of citizen social linguistics, and I have elaborated on it, and I have talked about what is citizen science and its tradition and its impetus today. So I will now turn to present insights from our former and ongoing citizen social linguistic projects here in Norway. Here you see some pictures, and those are from two main projects. The biggest one and former one, Ta tempen på språket, taking the temperature on language, and an ongoing project with Samantha Goodchild, Gavin Lamb, and Rafael Romeo Gomez. You see them here with a victory sign in the project Youth Speak Back. I will return to that project, but first I'd like to present Ta tempen på språket. And taking the temperature on language was a national research campaign in 2014, where we invited students in all grades in Norway to become language researchers. The research topics were based on interactions in one school class, so it was the joint project that we wanted to include their wishes as well as the researchers' scientific needs. So that project was between type 1 and type 2 in Kasparovsky's and his colleagues' typology. So, very brief, the pupils answered a questionnaire, they printed it out and went out and interviewed other pupils in different grades during recess. In the course of the campaign, students from all over the country collected popular words and phrases, explored their own and others' language and dialect competence and language use in various contexts, and they registered the data in a digital database, a database that we developed together with the University of Bergen. So to recruit pupils and to make the project visible for the public and teachers, we put up booths in the four biggest countries of Norway, and where we developed different language-related tasks and activities, games, quiz, and here, just by accident, you recognize this guy down on the right side there. That is Jim Cummins, who just happened to pass by. So he's taking a quiz in Norwegian and listening to different languages and trying to pinpoint which language that is. So very good. And here you see it's the result of all. We managed to get 4,500 pupils involved, from 87 schools. And you see there were most participants from the 5th till the 10th grade. They were recruited from all over the country. Most of them came from the east, where the Oslo, the capital is, and the west, where Bergen is, the second largest town in Norway. I'll not turn into the result here now, because that would be a topic for another talk, but I'll just show you some of the popular words that these kids have made, at least. This is in Norway. You can wonder if it is, because it is OMFG, lul, laughing out loud, swag, YOLO, you only live once, and LMFAO, which I will not explain. So, these are the 12 most popular words we found. Interesting, this is in Norway, but they use abbreviations in English. Can ask if are they English any longer when they use it in our context and the context they do. Lol, YOLO, swag, serious, chill, DDW, drug, I don't know. By the way, beep, beer, RB, and deleg. It's a Norwegian translation of you only live once, you do live it en gang. So the scientific impact of the Norwegian citizen science studies is that it is the first national large-scale data set on the use of English among young people. And it's also the first national large-scale attempt to tap into language use in Norway's multilingual homes. I will not say something more. I can return to more results if you're interested in the discussion. But as you pointed out, the language exhibition, because what we did was that we incorporated the data from the citizens into a language exhibition, together with the different activities that we developed for these booths around in the country, these activities, language activities. And it was put up at the Oslo City Museum. And it lasted for 2 years. And in a Norwegian context, we had 150,000 visitors, which are quite a lot. It was it was a record for that museum, at least. And we put up a language lounge where we had city walks, debates, and lectures, and conversations with authors, for example, on language, place, and identity. And it was popular and was fun to work with. So, and here's a link to the documentary film as well, as I assume was put in the chat also. Here is a wall in the exhibition where we put up some of these words, as I've already mentioned to you. And we had different tasks here, a dialect battle. Here you see the former head of the University of Oslo battling very seriously with the president of the parliament, who was there for the opening. I managed to get him there. They were very seriously battling which dialect. And a map called, and a game called Where on Earth, where they were supposed to stick a flag related to different questions about language onto a world map, and an historical development of the language in Norway. Put your head in here and talk like these persons. Why do you think they talk like that? And to write your favorite word on the wall. And here are some visitors. So, what did we learn? We learned a lot, but we did not learn so much about the impact of participating in this citizen science project. For instance, in terms of empowerment, because in all the political research document on citizen science, as I went through in the beginning, empowerment is a main, well, how shall I put it? It is put forward as a main consequence of taking part in a CES project, and also democratization, that it will lead to democratization as such, and also democratization of research. It will enhance scientific literacy. And we also didn't learn very much about how did this participation enhance the participants' critical language awareness, their sociolinguistic stewardship. So we wanted to take this further, and that's why Rafael, Samantha, and I in June, we set up a pilot and went to an upper secondary school outside of Oslo. And here we calc the task, the way of doing things on taking the temperature on language. But we also include an evaluation form where we got at least some answers. So it was, did you learn anything about languages or language research that you didn't know before? If yes, write in below. That's our question. And they said, it was relatively easy to get data for research. And our question, to those who conducted their interviews, how was it being a language researcher? Didn't feel too much like a language researcher, but it was fun. Felt more like someone collecting data. And goes on, would have been fun to take part in the actual analysis of the data we collected and what that means for the language. So that was some of the answers, and now we want to work closer with just a group of adolescents. We have now recruited and invited 4 adolescents as language researchers to become language researchers. Hopefully on Tuesday, they will come on Wednesday, we are settling out. But those were recruited by, we went out to a suburban place outside of Oslo 2 weeks ago or so, setting up a coffee table and with different tasks, linguistic tasks again, this little game on where on earth to this little with flags and language related questions, and of course with chocolate. I'm sorry. So we were very popular. So now I have presented some insights from our studies, and I will now end by discussing the affordances and challenge of citizen science and citizen social linguistics in terms of recruitment, ethics, data collection, efficacy, and validity. And in that discussion, I will critically engage in what can be called the recent CS hype across scientific disciplines and in research policy programs. I can do this in 5 minutes, believe it or not. So recall citizen science and its major impetus, as I stated in the beginning of the talk. There is a growing global demand for public participation and engagement in research or democratization of science. And citizen science is, or it is an answer, it is one of the answers. But it seems to me, having engaged with citizen science research and in networks, it is somehow presented and thought of as a jack of all trades. I'm coming here with a little warning, be aware of the citizen science hype. And I argue that there is a risk to overestimate the effects of citizen science unless you specify what kind of citizen science project you are actually carrying out. Remember the typology where the citizens' involvement varies, whether it's you as a scientist that set the research agenda, or whether you involve the citizens in asking, formulating the research question, taking part in the data collection analysis, maybe even the production of the scientific papers. And also, it is a risk to overestimate the effect if you're not dealing with questions of ethics, impact, and recruitment in terms of representations. So affordances, definitely. Remember the young person who said, oh, it was really efficient to collect data. And it is. As soon as you have worked it out, it's efficient. When it actually happened, it's efficient. You get a lot of data in a short amount of time. And it's indeed very stimulating to work with citizen scientists, and it can create and develop the dialogue between academia and lay people, and it can foster scientific literacy and an increased trust in research. It can stimulate critical language awareness, stewardship, and empowerment, but there are also some challenges. It's extremely time-consuming to prepare, develop material, perhaps develop a database, and to recruit, and not to mention to work with the citizen scientists, because you have to train them, particularly in qualitative projects. When it comes to recruitment, it's the need to think about representation. Maybe it's only those who are already interested that will be recruited. It is. You have to be interested to participate. But maybe if you compensate them for some money, is that ethical? Is it? Well, I'll come back to that. But representation when it comes to gender, age, other social categories, and also there is definitely a technological divide between those who have access to and competence in digital equipment and those who has not, because citizen science is very much built on digital or technologies. And when it comes to ethical challenges, when data collection is left to the citizens, there is the risk that the ethical requirements may not be taken care of, because you leave it to them, and they are going out and have to have third-party consent. So, and also if you involve children, they need to have parental consent. It's time-consuming, and you need to monitor the ethical dimension of it. Voice can identify a person. Can they do sound clip, pictures, videos? And the compensation to the citizen scientists. We have discussed with the EXA, European Citizen Science Association, and come up with that it is a need to compensate when you invite people to take part as researchers. Some compensation is needed, and that is an important discussion to take. And when you regarding trust in science, maybe it can be the fact that the actual contribution by the citizen is not visible in the outcomes. Maybe you just collect the data and you just produce them, publish them. And then what? Citizens can actually lose trust in science and the scientists by taking part in citizen science project. I have listed here a reference to a new ethical framework regarding collaborative research in the European Union called Pro-Ethics. And I'll also point you in the direction of the article of Kasparovsky and his colleagues on the ethical boundary work in citizen science. There are other challenges: quality control, quality of data. This is definitely self-reporting data. Are there any restrictions on possible sociolinguistic topics that the citizen scientists can work with? Words, obviously, but what about phonology? And also the lay people's competence. We need, of course, to train them and collaborate with them. But a rhetorical question in the end, maybe the citizen participation itself is the most important thing in citizen science research. I think it's much more, but it is definitely important. So I have two take-home messages and then I'm finished. The one is in order to pinpoint and to meet the needs of society and the societal challenges of today, including inclusive schools, there is a need for a closer collaboration between non-professional, differs how we call them, citizens, lay people, volunteers, and researchers or scientists, and citizen social linguistics is one way of doing this. And the second take-home message is that there is a need to develop citizen social linguistics further, particularly in terms of investigating the impact of citizen social linguistics, the impact of it. The impact for the citizens, the impact for science, and in public across the globe in a variety of contexts with varying degrees of online access and literacy, as well as under different political regime, to quote Samantha Goodchild and myself in a book review just last year. So thank you very much, and thank you so much for your attention, and I'll stop here.
Right. Is Raphael still around there?
Yes.
Yes, I'm around. Thank you, Bente, for your presentation. Now, in between opening up the digital floor for discussions and the presentation that Bente just gave, Makone will initiate the discussion with a few questions.
Okay, is there a way in which we can all see ourselves if you remove the last PowerPoint? Okay. Yeah, okay, good. I want to start off with my quibble with citizen science. And then I'll move on to what I think are more substantial concerns. I feel very uncomfortable with the idea of citizen science, particularly the notion of citizen. As a Black migrant worker myself, every time you're talking about citizen science, I feel completely excluded from the whole enterprise. Because the notion of citizen brings with it certain categories and certain assumptions which excludes other people. I know this is not what you meant, but the term citizen is a highly loaded one, and it is potentially very discriminatory, because what about the immigrants? What about the so-called undocumented workers? Does it mean that their notions of science don't matter? I know towards the end, you then shifted and started talking about lay people, perhaps local knowledge, etc. For me, notions about lay people, etc., might be are more acceptable than the idea of citizen, because citizen is too much tied to excluding other people. But that's just because of my own positionality and experience in life. Then my next question to you, which is more important, which I would like to get an idea from. What exactly is the core idea in citizen science? Because if the core idea is to bring science to society, the problem that is there is that in the presentation and in the little that I've read about citizen science, you still keep using categories which the lay people hardly use when they're talking about their lives. For example, data, recruitment, analysis. These are highly specialized terms that are associated with academic or scientific practices, and rarely used by the ordinary individual. The ordinary individual doesn't normally talk about data collection or recruitment or analysis. In other words, the universes of citizen science and the universe of the lay people seem to be in conflict. That's my first question, then I'll follow up with other questions. How do you resolve that tension between the universe of science and the universe of the ordinary individual.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think the first one is very important and very serious. And I don't know if you know the book by Betsy Rimes at University of Pennsylvania called How We Talk About Language, Exploring Citizen Sociolinguistics. It's here, came last in 2020, and where she has a long, she elaborates on the term citizen. And I think please correct me or comment upon it, but I think that is it is very contextualized in the term citizens or medborgare in Sweden, medborger in Norwegian. It's not that linked to citizenship as it seems to be in the United States, for instance. So maybe it's a difference here between the European and the American tradition, but at the same time, the Citizen Science Association, the first one was established in the United States. So I don't know how they reflect on the term citizen. It would be very interesting to look into that to see how the Citizen Science Association in America, how they reflect on the term citizens. Actually, in the European way, or at least in the Scandinavian way, with the medborgare, it's a co-citizen. It is like it's a more inclusionary term, and it's not so much linked to citizenship. As I assume it might be in the United States, but I'm not sure.
Okay. What I was trying to get at, what I was avoiding, but now that you're pulling me out, let me jump in. Citizen science, in the other part of my life, is not different from what I call science for xenophobic purposes. If I situate myself in, let's say if I'm in Southern Africa and somebody comes and tells me about citizen science, what comes out in my own mind is that this is science for xenophobic purposes. In other words, the citizen science movement has found itself in a very, very unusual situation in that as it seeks to become international, it has to engage with the way these concepts are understood in diverse, in these different contexts, the meanings that they carry in different contexts. That otherwise the citizen science just becomes imperial science, that the local context doesn't matter. I should just tell you what I think it is all about. The examples I was giving you in the US and in Africa, etc., are instances of where citizen science may be seen as potentially carrying negative connotations. Of course, I mean, these are all tied up with my own personal trajectory, but I don't think it's totally idiosyncratic. Basi and company can help me out on this. Is that you need that. And then the issue which comes up is citizen science, the way it is being framed, seems to avoid having to address issues about race. For example, how science comes across to Black Americans is very, very different from the way it would come across to white Caucasian Americans. Anyway, that's another story.
And I do agree, and I think from the work that I've read on citizen science, as I said, it has up until now been very European, Australian, American based, and the first meeting was on citizen science was held just before Christmas, and I in Africa, online from Kenya, and I think that these questions have never been addressed. It is a very Eurocentric or Western-centric perspective on it. And so those questions that you address here, it's so important to write about, because this development is just running when it comes to citizen science as such. So it's important to be on the ball and to highlight these questions. So I hereby invite you to write a paper with me on this topic. But I do, because it's so important that that's why I also said be aware of the citizen science type.
Yes.
It's not a solution to how can it lead to empowerment, how can it and of course if you don't include in different ways. For instance, the citizen science type can learn about traditional linguistic ethnography, for instance, where there has been I don't know if you like to call that imperial or not, but for instance, in the work of Cameron and Ben Rampton and in 1992 on empowering, so giving back to the community, and
yes.
But all those questions are very hard to how to give back. It seems like you
heard it. Yes.
Do you see my point?
Yes, I see your point. I mean, for example, I'm now giving back to the community. It's like I have this thing that the community now wants. Now I'm the benefactor. I mean, I can see Ben Rampton running and say, okay, you guys, you like this, it's your benefit. So you are the good Samaritan of sociolinguistics. It doesn't make sense to me. Raphael, let me stop. I have a lot of other questions. I think other people want to jump in.
Yes, thank you, Makoni, for initiating the discussion, and thank you, Bente, for your responses. I see here in the chat that we have some interventions by Mari Hanede and then Basi Antje. I'll start with a couple of questions written by Mari, unless Mari would like to ask the questions yourself. Okay, I'll go ahead and read them. Mari writes, I was wondering what the purpose of a citizen sociolinguistics project beyond involving youth in the language analysis. What is a larger goal other than involving the youth participants?
There are many goals. One burning issue or goal, I would say, to me at least, is to see whether there is some effect, some impact of engaging in research. That is the more relating to what we just discussed now, that I just now discussed with Makuni. What is the impact? Because it has been lifted up as the grand solution of all times, citizen science. So and there's hardly been any studies of that. What is the impact? So that is one thing. And another thing is, of course, that we work with minoritized youth and in Norway and in Scandinavia in general, we are also very privileged to, as researchers, to have our voice very often heard in the public sphere. The media are very keen on talking with us, etc. So it's also about social inclusion and yes. Is that an answer?
Follow up on that. This overlaps with Bussi's, one of Bussi's questions. So I understand the impact in social inclusion, but if, you know, if one of the goals is democratize knowledge production and involving youth in the research, you said you are providing them linguistic tasks. You're determining linguistic tasks, right? So the object of research doesn't seem to be negotiated. So decision making is on the researchers, and also framing linguistic tasks are on the part of the researcher. So it doesn't seem sort of democratic. And are these the minoritized youth that's contributing to the knowledge production? Like, are you sort of choosing particular population to reach the goal of social inclusion? So I have a question of what it means to collaborate with ordinary people, what it really means to, you know, democratize knowledge production when it seems the researcher is sort of like in control. Whereas, like, you know, there are a lot of research in other areas like critical literacy. The students in impoverished areas are doing collaborative research with the researchers to envision the park. You know, so that's really like directly for the benefit of the community to improve their living conditions. So I'm just sort of curious.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that is, remember the typology I set up, where the most common citizen science in general project is exactly the way what you say, that it's the researchers that, or the scientists that set up an agenda and go out and have the citizens to do that. That is not very collaborative research. What we did in the taking the temperature on language was that we collaborated with one school class so that they could develop their questions. What are they interested in when it comes to language? And of course, it was slang words, popular words, words that adults doesn't know of. But when you are to reach out to a whole nation, then you can't collaborate with everyone. So that was a solution we did to work with one school class and then develop that and then made it into a task that all school class could, in principle, engage in. So now we are working more closely, those who are with the young people that we're recruiting now. Now we have to have this collaborative work with the young people. You have to have fewer. You can't have many. You have to have fewer to really to have them involved in developing their research questions, what is relevant for them. So that's why we are now recruiting. We're not going to have more than 15 and 4 at the time, so that we can have them to develop what they are interested in. One of these guys, for instance, that we met just on the square, at the square we were, was, I wondered what people, you know, who just speak Norwegian, what they think when I'm beside of them speaking Somali together with my mother. I've always wondered about what do they think about it? How do they perceive me? So those questions, their questions are the ones that we are going to develop further, hopefully on Tuesday. So thank you.
Thank you, Mari and Bente. I'm now looking at the chat box, and there is the couple of questions by Bassi, and then I move on to Scott's, and then Cecilia's. So Bassi actually has made two questions. I'll start with the second because I think in a way it relates to the follow-up question by Mari. And Bassi writes, if an impetus for citizen science was to moderate the power dynamics in research, to democratize knowledge production, one wonders if the professionals are not the ones still framing the meta language and regulating what the laypersons contribute. And can I ask the second question, or would you like to respond to this one first, Bente?
I think I just agree because it's then you perhaps have to go to the third type where there's the citizens themselves who raise like a civic mobilization type where you can but then again you have to formulate the meta language together with them in a way that so yes, I think I just agree, and then you can take the next one.
Yes. Then Bassi starts with in Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, the French playwright Molière has a character say, "Good heavens, for more than 40 years I have been speaking prose without knowing it." And then the question goes, were there responses from participants of the kind below? I have been doing citizen sociolinguistics without knowing it. And then Bassi adds, Indians and Africans have been languaging well before professionals came to the party, professionals who are now inviting laypersons to contribute data.
It's super good, of course. But I can't say whether there were explicitly formulated like that. But what I can say is that language and identity, dialects, although we have a kind of a monolingual habitus here, or the tradition here in Norway, there are so many languages, so many dialects, and language is so important to people, of course, as elsewhere. But here we have our written standards we have our language standards in written. There are no oral standards, so we can speak Norwegian in the way whatever we like, and dialects have high status in the National Broadcasting Company newspaper. The Minister of Finance speak local dialect. So it's we have so meaning that people talk about language all the time. Yes. So that was the comment, at least.
Yes. I'll move on then to Scott's question. And if you have written here, I will assume that it's okay for me to read. So if you'd like to ask the question or comment yourself, just please let me know. Okay. Then Scott writes, I like Christopher Stroud's conceptualization of linguistic citizenship, where being a citizen is not a status one is given by a state, but a process enacted in collective striving towards some preferred future. I'm currently implementing a short project with young people in South Africa who are exploring the role of language, ideologies, and policy in their lives and activism. The young people are involved both in collecting and interpreting sociolinguistic data, but we have conceived of this as participatory action research and not citizen science. Perhaps the word science brings some unwelcome connotations. So I wanted to ask Bente why she understands citizen sociolinguistics as a type of citizen science and not as participatory or action, etc. type of sociolinguistics.
Thank you very much. And it's these notions are, of course, in the move. It's not anything that is settled. So because participatory action research or just participatory research is of course a type of a form of citizen science, and it's perhaps, as you say, that the science term brings some other connotation, maybe because it has this natural sciences, hard sciences. When it comes to the slow sciences, humanities and social sciences, maybe we should use research instead. I see that it's coming up in the social sciences coming up as more and more as citizen social research. So it might be an idea. I don't mean that we need to be part of this citizen science train. We don't need to do that at all. But at the same time, I think it's needed that we're actually reflecting on these topics relating with the citizen science traditional research can learn a lot from us. They can learn, for instance, we know a lot, both as sociolinguistics or linguistic anthropologists or sociologists. We know a lot about power relations between the researcher and the researched, for instance. That asymmetry in power relations seems to be completely non-spoken about in the European and the American citizen science, let me just say, hype. So I think it's important not to just say that no, we don't accept anything of this, but to be on the ball and to contribute, and not just to let the train just pass and we are just you know, because it's happening now. Now it's happening.
Thank you.
So ethical. So a paper on the ethical dimensions of citizen social linguistic research. Perfectly, it would be perfect. Sinfrey Makuni, or just Makuni, referring to another discussion, and Scott, welcome. So we have not landed the discussion yet.
Yes, and joining in the discussion, we have Cécile Vigoureau, who writes, the citizen sociolinguistics is about the politics of knowledge production and prompts to ask once again what qualifies as knowledge and for whom, who produces it, and under what particular socio-historical and institutional conditions, and for whom, and to whom it is delivered. Who the knowledge is produced for may not always be the same as who it is delivered to. In an interesting way, citizen sociolinguistics aligns with the social constructions of science as ideology-free, which is at the core of its claim of legitimacy and truthfulness.
Yes, sorry, I don't have any question, but to follow up, I think there is a, how can I frame it? We often talk about, and you talked about data collection. And I think it's a big problem because there is a confusion in the literature in general between data collection and material collection, which are two different things. Data linguistic data are a result of a certain procedure. It's not because you are going to record something on the street that it automatically qualifies as data. Data is a selective process, and we all know when we work with, in ethnography or whatever. So we need to get really, we need to stop talking about data collection as if, you know, there are fruits hanging and we just, you know, we just take the fruits from the tree. So, so that's why it reifies a little bit, I think, the kind of relationship of the researcher with the consultant, informant, whatever you want to call him or her or them. And it really, yeah, I think it obscures a lot of transformation that go through the work of, you know, linguistic material. So please, I think we should stop saying collecting data. That doesn't make sense at all. And I agree with a lot of points that Makoni raised in his first intervention. Thank you.
Let me just jump in, then expand what Cecile was saying. In another part of my life, when I argue language is a myth, the follow-up argument I have made, which really hasn't been taken up, is that if language is a myth, you can't collect data, right? Because it's not there. I mean, the idea of collecting data gives the impression, as Cecile has aptly put it, that there are items out there in the world that you are then going to collect, which you then subsequently transcribe. Language does not render itself to collection as other artifacts like archaeology, stones, etc., because it doesn't exist independent of us. So that, I think, is an argument which has been made by people who work in integrationism, Roy Harris, etc., where they debate, is it possible to collect data? Is language collectible in this particular sense? Yes, I agree with you, Cecile. Yeah, Bente, yes. I was just supporting what Cecile was saying, that I think that's a point to make.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point to make. And I totally agree with Cecile Vigogo when it comes to your first comment. Of course, the meta language we use, yes, as researchers, and that's tapping back to your second question, Makoni, that it is it's not the lay people, if you call it them that, or the citizen scientists or whatever, volunteers talk about that. So in another way, there was this comment that from one of the youth that, as I showed you, it was I learned that it was easy to collect data. So I don't know. No, but it's important to have, of course, this discussion on, because I fully agree that language is not something that you can go out and collect as like it is in a social interaction, but also material. The materiality of the language, or the semiotics, so it's larger than that. So yeah, perfectly agree.
Oh, go ahead then and ask questions by Chanel, and then Maya has her hand raised. So Chanel writes, in projects like these, I also wonder about outputs. While as researchers in universities, our forms of outputs are data that will become journal articles, etc., what do the citizens or communities get out of this? Are researchers open to multiple forms of output beyond scholarly outputs? Can research like this be seen as extractivist?
My question is very similar, kind of building on this one. Should I kind of put it in to maybe respond together? Sometimes the publication process and academic journals, etc., might obscure the benefits of publishing to the researcher and other institutions. So I'm going to take a mental leap into the copyright regime and how things get recorded there to kind of help us address this point. So the copyright regime has it now that the person who takes a picture or who records the information is the owner of the information, and not those who are represented in that photo or whose knowledge is represented by what was captured. So within that frame, pharmaceutical companies, a number of them at least, use remedies devised by indigenous communities, write them up, patent them, make billions of dollars with that do not touch the hands of the people who created these remedies, the original scientists, who are often groups and not individuals. Another issue with the copyright regime and group, who does things, groups or individuals. And then another example, a local citizen scientist, if I use, kind of generously extend this framing, could make an archaeological discovery that is reported to and recorded by the archaeological mission and then promptly discovered by the archaeology scientists or researchers. So do you see any hope in the newly framed citizen scientist movement as in remedying any of these epistemic harms? And if yes, how?
Thank you. Epistemic harms, I'd like you to expand on that, the harm part. But let me first take the first question. When it comes to publishing and output, I would very much like to try to take that further, to have lay people to publish together with us, to have the name on the paper, just to see how that goes and how it is. Like Kullenberg, another scientific philosopher on the bulletin boards in Gothenburg, has done that, and it's so many authors of one of his papers, and I like the idea. Another thing why I like to pursue the citizen sociolinguistic or lay people or research is that there has been many studies that shows that scientists do not rely in citizen data or the data that people collect. Sorry for using the word collect, but using it. They don't rely on participatory research, and the data is not valid. And that doesn't just those studies are of course done within natural sciences and the like, but there are also, I meet all the time questions from people in the humanities and social sciences as well, but it's only self-reported data. You know, that old discussion. So this is also one reason why I work with this within this field, is like I want to, self-reported data, it's nothing wrong with that, and it's the interaction itself. I want to emphasize the importance of. But when it comes to, can you please repeat the remember, I am in the afternoon tea. And the sun has went down. And can you repeat, please, on the epistemic harm, Maya?
So the epistemic harms, I'm imagining, not a finite list, but appropriating the information or ways of thinking or actual knowledge of another group and then representing it in your, claiming it as yours without giving credit. It's anonymous. and like anonymizing as anonymizing the research collaborators by calling them citizens. Citizens is a, like, and doesn't have a person behind them, or there is a person, but I don't know.
What you do, well, am I on? Yes. It's here in Norway and in the European Union, we had a new, it's called Gdpr. It's a personal, it's really strict when it comes to how you can, you have to anonymize and you have to apply and have approval for everything you do when you involve persons, and particularly children. So it would not be the case here in Europe that you can publish a picture of somebody, for instance, in a journal without having their approval or the parents' approval.
So one kind of contrary space that I'm imagining as possibly remedying some of these harms is the open source, kind of research and knowledge creation movement. And I don't know what the status of Wikipedia right now is, from the perspective of the academic community. It's been here for, a long time now, compared to critiques when it first came up. And there, there are definitely complicated entries that, researchers could be writing for a handbook or an encyclopedia entry. And it's a collaborative science in that sense, or collaborative research. And there is a trail of who wrote what and who edited what and when. So I wonder, whether that's a better model.
Yeah, and it's important, and I think it's interesting to develop that further, because this has hardly been done. Like how to co-publish within this framework, at least the traditional citizen science framework. Yeah. So I'd love to discuss that further. I must think a bit more on it. Thank you, Maya.
And Cécile Figueroa asks another question, and she starts writing. One of my favorite authors, Karl Marx, wrote, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." To what extent is citizen sociolinguistics not business as usual under another name?
Yeah, and that's a very important question to ask. I've thought about it many times. This is just new wine in old bottles. I think that also has to be contextualized a bit when it comes to different scientific fields, because from our perspectives within the humanities or social sciences, it's perhaps that can be discussed. Maybe that is what it is. But I do think if you come from a natural science point of view, or other sciences, you have not included the fact that you that you're interacting with people. So I think it has to be contextualized in that when it comes to different sciences, but also the difference of involving the level of involvement of the lay people. It is a possibility to include, develop further, I think, within this framework, and to be on the ball, as I said, or the train that is passing.
Can I add something to my question before? Sorry, Anissa, I don't want to cut you, but it's a follow-up of my question. If you don't mind, are you okay? Okay. So to me, I'm gonna be very blunt. It looks to me like bourgeois social linguistics, you know, in the sense that I think that the problem, the way I see it, is that the problem is social linguists or scientists have with themselves. It actually has nothing to do with people, the way I see it, you know, and they have a problem maybe with their position. They question their legitimacy. They question their relationship to their informant, consultant, whatever you want to call them, partners, etc. So to me, it has nothing to do with people out in the world, but mainly it has to do with the researchers themselves and maybe their discomfort they have with what they do and the way they do it. That's why I call it a very bourgeois social linguistic that has actually nothing to do with people.
Thank you very much. And I think it's important to comment upon that because it's also important to bring that view out in the public and not just here in our forum, because citizen science is really put forward as in policy by policymakers, research policymakers who fund research. So it's so important to have these discussions as we have now for what is it? What can it bring? Can it empower people? You know, can it lead to democratization of research? Maybe, as I pointed to in my talk, maybe it can lead to a mistrust in science because it is perhaps in project when they are driven mainly by the scientists. Is it a difference between what kind of framework you put on, what kind of or type of, remember the typology of the different citizen science projects and publications. So, and I think that it is important to have these critic voices brought out. So please do so.
And moving on, we have one question by Anissa in the chat, and Anissa writes, as soon as citizens get involved with the data collection at this level, do they not surrender their citizenship?
Here again, I think I might not be the right person to answer that because the word citizenship means something else, I think, in our context than in other contexts. And I don't know. So could you explain your question? Maybe contextualize it.
By citizenship here, I put the commas around it. I mean the status of being a lay person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's it. That is also very interesting. When do you stop being a lay person? Because a researcher is a lay person I'm a lay person in many other respects. So that is a very interesting question to discuss. And I haven't seen it discussed anywhere. So that is very interesting to pursue. Thank you.
We're reaching the end of the first formal session. I see Cecile virtual hand is still up. Is that a follow-up or is just stayed up? Okay. Then, before we move on to our after party, Makoni, would you like to make some final comments?
Yes, I mean, thank you very much for this discussion. As I listened to the conversation, a couple of questions kept coming into my mind. I was interested, for example, in exploring what would be the relationship between citizen science and indigenous knowledge practices. Because in some parts of the world, there's also a very big movement towards indigenous knowledge practices. So I thought, oh, now, how are these two going to be related? Or are we now going to have a pluriversal world in which citizen science is more highly regarded than indigenous knowledge practices? That's another question. Then the other part that I thought was interesting was the idea of science itself as mentally as a way of thinking about the world. In another part of the world that I live in once in a while, I don't draw distinctions between science, spirituality, religion, etc. Those are distinctions that I have to carefully appropriate when I'm trying to think that I'm literate. So what you have here are two conflicting movements. Citizen science is consistent with the Western epistemologies of classification of the world. Whereas if I'm an African scholar, my impulse is to go much more towards a holistic approach in which everything is interwoven with everything, in which everything is linked up with everything, where religion, spirituality, science, and all these are all part of the same thing. So you could argue cynically that what citizen science is doing is to impose on other people one very monolithic way of understanding the world, which does not take into account other types of knowledge ecologies. That's the way I tend to think about it at the moment. Then the other thing which was coming through my mind as I listened to this was, if there's any argument for decoloniality, citizen science has made the case for it. Citizen science, of all the latest manifestations of knowledge, to quote Cecil's notion of bourgeois sociolinguistics, is more in need of decoloniality to correct the pathway that they are taking than other previous manifestations of sociolinguistics. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that citizen science needs more to be decolonized than anything else, because it is giving the impression that it is democratizing scholarship, when in actual fact, it might not be at all, because it is still retaining the same meta-discursive regimes about data, recruitment, ethics, etc., which are fundamentally the problem, which have fundamentally created the problems that we are faced with at the moment. Yeah, thank you.